So it's now 1 o'clock. We'll get started with our live meditation. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for these online practice sessions. I'm Matt Abrahams. I'm Tricycle's senior editor. Those church bells near my house mean it's 1 o'clock according to them now. Our guest teacher today is Kurt Spellmeyer. He's a Zen priest who directs the Cold Mountain Sangha in New Jersey. He also teaches English at Rutgers University and has been a longtime contributor to Tricycle. I'm personally a huge fan of his essays, which you can of course find at tricycle.org. So we're in for a treat today. A few notes about the call. We're on a Zoom webinar, so all participants and audio and video have been turned off. We're recording the session for anyone who can't attend live, and you can find those recordings as well as our schedule for future sessions at tricycle.org/live. Our next session is actually tomorrow, April 22nd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and our editor-in-chief, James Shaheen, will be moderating a Q&A with Joseph Goldstein, the Insight meditation teacher. We are offering these sessions for free, and of course appreciate any donations that you're able to give. Your support will help us keep providing these opportunities for people to connect with wonderful teachers like Kurt during these really challenging times. You can donate by going to tricycle.org/live and clicking the donate button at the top of the page. Finally, towards the end of today's session, we'll have some time for a Q&A. You can post your questions in the Q&A panel, accessible through the button at the bottom of the video screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. At the end, the total session is going to be about an hour, so we'll just see how much time we have left. If you're tuning in today from Facebook Live, hello. You can post your questions in the comment field there, and we'll add it to our list and see if we can get to those too. So again, thank you so much to everyone for being here and for being here with Kurt. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you to Tricycle also. You know, I have been reading Tricycle since the first edition. In fact, I think the first edition is somewhere in my house. I'm sure I haven't thrown it out. So it's wonderful to be involved with this fantastic magazine, and I'm very happy to be here today. And welcome to everybody who's taken the time to come here. This is a free online practice session. Free means free. Online means I don't always know what I'm doing, and practice means we're actually going to do some sitting. Okay, so the way I've thought of structuring this is that we will have some discussion, we'll have some remarks, then we'll have some practice. I have to mute my my own computer. We'll have practice for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the vibe, how it feels. Then some more remarks and another another period of practice with a little different frame around it, and then some concluding remarks. So if you don't have your cushions, why not? Please get them right now, and we'll be able to go forward. If you don't have cushions at all, please seat yourself comfortably in a chair so that we can do some of this meditation. I am a Zen teacher, and so it's very difficult for me to speak at all on any subject unless I bring a koan in at the beginning to frame the discussion. I don't even think I know how to talk about Buddhism without starting with a koan. So I'd like to start with a koan. And as soon as I introduce it, I'm going to abandon it, actually. But it will sort of provide a context for everything that's going to follow. So this is case 87 in the Blue Cliff record, the Pien Lu, the Heikigan Roku. Main subject, Umon said to his disciples, medicine and sickness cure each other. All the earth is medicine. Where do you find yourself? So, this is definitely the koan for our times, it seems to me. I don't have to enumerate all the ways in which our culture seems to be in peril. But for those of us who have been followers of the Dharma, nothing that's happening is too surprising, right? I mean, we know that impermanence is a fundamental aspect of all structures, and we're watching our own structures morph in ways that are unpredictable and scary. At the same time, people we know and love may not be here in a month or in a year. And I don't think there's anybody who can say with accuracy how the world is going to look 6 months from now. So in a way, this is the worst of times. But in another way, this is a wonderful opportunity, wonderful and terrible opportunity for us to deepen our practice and pursue awakening. The contradictions we face now are like Rubik's cubes, right? How do we get through? If we open the economy, we risk killing lots of people. If we stay at home, as I think we should, if I may editorialize for a minute, if we stay at home, we could create the next Great Depression. So how do we go? Some of us right now probably are counting our pennies because checks aren't coming in. I have many friends who are independent artisans or contractors, and they don't know where the next meal is going to arrive from. So this is a difficult time, but it's also this wonderful opportunity. In other words, the Dharma can be understood as medicine that can help us deal with our sickness, not just COVID-19, but a larger sickness, you could say, personal, cultural, and so on. But one of the puzzling aspects of the koan is it also says that sickness cures medicine. It doesn't just say medicine cures sickness, which everybody knows. It says sickness cures medicine. And I think that's something we need to keep in our minds as we're going through the days and weeks that will follow. Because there's something about sickness, strangely, that we need to wake up or might need to wake up. So I want to start today with ancient Zen teaching. Those of you who are familiar with Zen know about Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma was the Indian monk who brought Chan or Zen to China. And some of his teachings are still available to us. And in particular, Bodhidharma is known for what are called the 2 entrances and the 4 practices. And in this discourse, Bodhidharma says there's basically, he said there's 80,000 Dharma doors. There are many ways to practice and wake up. He said, but basically there's 2 paths. And he says the first is entrance by principle. Entrance by principle. And that's not at all clear, but what he means is there are people who just naturally follow the path and they know how to abide in non-discriminating mind. They practice what Bodhidharma called pikwan, sitting in front of the wall of emptiness. So there are really people in the world who don't get up and go online and, after meditating, I hope, and read Salon or Alternet and fulminate about Donald Trump. There are people who get up in the morning and they face the empty wall of Mushin, Shunyata. And they live in that emptiness moment by moment, day by day. And if you said to them, well, what about Trump? They'd say, Trump who? Or COVID-19, what's that? there are such people, and in fact, Bodhidharma was such a person. You know, in Zen lore, Bodhidharma had an opportunity to meet with one of the great benefactors of Buddhism in his time, Emperor Wu of Liang. And Bodhidharma had basically an interview with the emperor, who had funded research institutes and temples and convents and monasteries. And they couldn't communicate at all. The emperor, though a good-hearted person, did not understand Bodhidharma's teaching of emptiness. And Bodhidharma simply left the interview, politely, I'm sure, and went up into the mountains and lived in a cave where he practiced Piquan, staring at the wall of the cave, but also that wall of emptiness, unperturbed and untroubled by all the chaos around him. You know, for what it's worth, Emperor Wu, this wonderful man, was eventually murdered. His beautiful kingdom was overthrown. Bodhidharma was not drawn into all of that. But that's a rare sort of person. Most of us can't quite get there right now, can't quite be there right now. And so Bodhidharma says there's a second path. The first path, as I said, is the entrance by principle, that facing the wall of emptiness, Piquan. But he says there's also something he calls the entrance by practice. And I think that's more appropriate to us right now. That's basically engaging with what's happening in our society, the COVID, Trump, the works, right? And he says, in order to practice, in order to follow the entrance by practice, we need to cultivate there are basically 4 steps. It's a 4-step program. And the first step is what John McCrae translates as practice, the practice of responding to adversity or enmity, the hostility of others. And it could also be translated as the practice of requiting injuries, the practice of requiting injuries. And Bodhidharma says something really interesting. He says, when we face events like we're facing now, when we have a leader who is actually causing people to die, when we have a dysfunctional system that can't respond, when we are fired by our boss, you know, to whom we've given our loyalty and our sweat and our tears. Bodhidharma says something really curious. He says, you know, step 1 of the entrance by practice is, he says, the requiting of injuries. And what he says is this: these are Bodhidharma's words, my present suffering constitutes the fruition of my past crimes and karma, rather than anything bequeathed to me by any heavenly or human being. I shall accept it patiently and contentedly without complaint. Now, you know, that's a really interesting statement. He says, when bad things happen to us, what we're supposed to say is, my present suffering constitutes the fruition of my own past crimes and karma, rather than anything bequeathed to me from any heavenly or human being. I shall accept it patiently and contentedly without complaint. Now, that's really strange advice, you know, because I must say, I voted for Hillary Clinton. I didn't vote for Trump. And I didn't create corporate capitalism. I definitely wish it weren't here. How can this be my fault? And isn't it rather unhealthy to accept blame for something I didn't do, basically? But you know, we'll come back to this a little later. But what there are these 3 other steps to his 4-step program. And you know, first is saying, like, all of this is in some way my karma, the working of my personal karma. The next thing he says is the next step is what he calls the acceptance of circumstances. And that's an interesting move. What he basically says is, you know, we want to imagine that the present moment, America today, COVID-19, Trump, this is not who we really are. We have a self that exists independent of all these things. And Bodhidharma says, actually, we don't have any such self. You know, the reality is, you could say, a self-organizing complex system. And within that system, what we call the self arises. And that at this moment, in this system, and there is no other system, I'm arising and Trump is arising, and all of these, COVID-19 is arising. All of these things are arising simultaneously as part of like one, part of interbeing. You know, we understand interbeing in a positive way, but interbeing also has this complicated aspect that, you know, in some way, I'm in it with Trump. In other words, what Bodhidharma is saying is, there isn't another world, there isn't another opportunity to exist. These are the materials I have to work with. And then step 3 of his 4-step program is what he calls the extinction of craving, or extinguishing craving. And he says, you know, when I look at the world, I have to realize that, okay, Trump might be, he might be defeated. Let's hope so in the next election. And then Joe Biden becomes president. But actually, you know, there are going to be problems when Joe Biden becomes president. In other words, you know, there's always going to be an unsatisfactory character to reality. And so, you know, it's never going to be right. Now, I admit, you know, it's very wrong now, and it would be nice to have it a little less wrong. But in a certain way, you know, if we say it's never going to be right, Bodhidharma says that's actually a necessary step, right? It's like relinquishing the craving for something else or something better. It's part of the idea that this is the material we have to work with now. And the last of the 4 steps is what Bodhidharma calls accordance with the Dharma, or a unification with things as they really are. And this is like saying, okay, no outcome is going to ever be satisfactory. You know, there isn't ever going to be a perfect world or perfect leader. If after COVID-19, there's going to be something else. There'll be another pandemic, or, you know, coming right down the road is this global catastrophe of climate change and the 6th great extinction. So what's next is coming down the road. And so the spirit, Bodhidharma says, of how we respond to these events is accepting personal responsibility. Secondly, giving up on the desire for anything other than what's happening now. Extinguishing craving, and then unifying ourselves with this moment. And in that process, we can cultivate a spirit of dana. I have no control really over most aspects of my life. And yet, you know, I'm going to make myself available to others, no matter what. You know, I can't control it. I don't know what the outcome is going to be of this or that, but it's not the world I chose, but it is the world that is my true self, and I'm going to harmonize myself in a spirit of dana, sort of ideally selfless giving. I'm going to be useful to people in any capacity that presents itself. So those are Bodhidharma's 2 entrances and 4 practices. But how do we actually put that into action? How do we actually practice that, practice the 4 practices, right? So I'd like to sort of step away from Bodhidharma for a minute and say the rest of this hour is going to be spent talking about how we can put Bodhidharma's 2 gates and 4 practices into bring it into our lives and make it our practice. I want to step away just a little bit though and say that, you know, when Bodhidharma came from India, he brought with him one sutra. And even though the Zen is associated with the Diamond Sutra, which is sort of the dominant sutra or the most important sutra in Zen now, you know, the original key text to Zen was the Lankavatara Sutra. And I highly recommend the great Red Pine's wonderful translation of the Lankavatara Sutra, which is now available to all of us. And it's a heavy read, but he has done a brilliant job. And in the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha makes, he offers a way of understanding our practice that I think is tremendously helpful. And I think it influenced Bodhidharma. You know, the Buddha says that when every moment of consciousness has three elements. The first and most obvious element is what Red Pine translates as the unfolding. This is moment by moment unfolding of events. So, you know, this morning, the New York Times said the death rate was this. Unemployment is unequaled since the Great Depression. You know, there's a thunderstorm in Plainfield, New Jersey, and it knocks out the power, so you can't leave your house, and now you don't even have the internet. So there's this moment by moment character to events. That's what he calls the unfolding. Now, you know, most people live in the unfolding, and that's their sole reality. That's where they spend their lives. What they don't normally see is the karmic. So there's the unfolding, the karmic, and there's something Bodhidharma calls the intrinsic, or the Lankavatara Sutra rather calls the intrinsic. The unfolding, the karmic, and the intrinsic. So the unfolding is this event, the one damn thing after another character of our phenomenal world. And then there is this aspect of the karmic, right? So when we experience an event, you know, it's actually neutral. Things are just as they are, but when we experience events, we color them with our prior life history. So as we've been growing up, we have made judgments about reality that have affected our perceptions going forward. And some of those judgments worked for us in the past, but you know, they have a kind of karmic resonance which obstructs us going forward. So some of you, I'm at the age where I'm approaching retirement, not that far from now. And like many people, you know, most of my life is tied up in like my 401k, you know. And I'm lucky to have a 401k, but I lost about 50% of it 2 weeks ago. You know, and when this event happened, I definitely thought to myself, you know, I'm in trouble. And I also thought to myself, I remembered growing up in Baltimore. And I remember my parents arguing about money. And I also remember my mother crying and saying, what are we going to do? And so on. And so, you know, all of that colored my experience of this event. Right? So this is karma, right? We all have karmic baggage. And karma is the source of our suffering. So when Bodhidharma says, actually, all of this is my own karma, it's true, you didn't elect Trump. But how we respond to Trump or how we respond to COVID-19 is something we created, not intentionally. Sort of one micro decision after another created this karmic legacy that colors how we experience the unfolding dimension. So the question is, how do we free ourselves from that samsaric cycle, that mutually reinforcing cycle of misperception? And Bodhidharma says that's why we need the intrinsic. And the intrinsic is something people don't notice, generally speaking. They're not too aware of the karmic. If they go to psychotherapy, they become aware, you could say, of the karmic. But the intrinsic, most people never notice if they don't practice meditation. And the intrinsic is, there is a part of your consciousness which is absolutely unmoving, absolutely motionless. And in that motionless, that motionlessness, you could say, is what we in the Mahayana call Buddha nature. It's that experience of the motionless, the unmoving, the imperturbable, is our first taste of Buddha nature. And so, you know, the practice of Zen, the practice of meditation in the Bodhidharma school, involves discovering the immovable, the imperturbable, and using that to free ourselves from karma. So what I would like to do now is actually encounter with you the imperturbable. So for the next, say, 10 minutes, I would like you to seat yourselves and straighten your back and focus on your breath perception. Follow the breath out, out, out until it's gone. Each breath unfolding has the character, each breath is unfolding. It's part of the unfolding. But as you're following the breath, especially if you pay attention to what happens at the end of the breath, please see if you experience something like at the end of the breath before you take your next inhalation. If you notice a kind of stillness or immobility at the end of the breath. So I'd like to start right now and ask you, this is sort of the project right now, if you would be kind enough to join me in meditation for, say, 10 minutes or a little bit longer, we'll see how it goes, and see if you can find the imperturbable, the unmoving. Okay, let's stop there for a minute. If you've been practicing meditation for a while, it might be the case that you've encountered the intrinsic yourself without calling it the intrinsic. You're watching the breath go out, each breath going out, and that's the unfolding dimension. But if you stay with the breath, sooner or later, you're going to notice, it might be at the end of your breath, and it might simply emerge spontaneously, that you enter a state of immobility or motionlessness. And that actually is sometimes called in Zen Samadhi, that state of Samadhi, unification with the object of your attention. In this case, the breath produces that state of motionless attention, or sometimes called choiceless attention, but I think motionless attention would be a better word for it. That's Dhammo, that's Bodhidharma's, or rather Lankavatara Sutra's intrinsic. So a lot of Zen practice, especially initially, is finding the intrinsic and being able to ground yourself in the intrinsic. And if you, Bodhidharma himself says that this is, when this happens, you experience joy. So people who can enter what we call in Zen deep samadhi can find that even if they begin the meditation period in a condition of emotional distress, if you sit long enough just watching your breath, your distress begins to recede and you begin to enter this motionless state. And often that's accompanied by a kind of joy, like not just release, but really positive energy. Now, you know, the interesting thing is that you can't, if you remain in that state, it's not good for you, right? Entering that state of deep samadhi or deep samatha, shamatha, as it used to be called, is not enlightenment. And even though your emotional distress goes away, that's not enlightenment. There's another stage to practice, which is returning to the unfolding now that you've grounded yourself in the intrinsic. See, returning to the unfolding now that you've grounded yourself in the intrinsic. So while I'm speaking, you might want to, if you want to stretch your legs or stand up in place, please feel free, because we're going to go back to the cushion in a few minutes. You know, the ability to enter that motionless place is absolutely crucial in Zen practice. If you can't enter deep samadhi, if you read the literature of Zen, from Shuyun all the way back to Bodhidharma, you'll see that everybody stresses the importance of being able to enter samadhi. And it is like magic medicine. It absolutely, eventually, that experience of samadhi takes on a deeper character as emptiness, as mushin. We call it Zen mushin. So if you sit down on the cushion and you begin to enter the motionless, you'll notice that after a while, your mind becomes blank and empty. That's Dhammo's, that's Bodhidharma's Pikwan, staring at the wall of emptiness, see. And the Heart Sutra says that if you go to that wall, if you go to that emptiness, that immovable place, the intrinsic place, and you stay there, there's no suffering it can't release you from. That's the promise of the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra says, go ahead, think of a kind of suffering. In that state, there's no suffering, and there's no suffering that state can't liberate us from. However, that's not enlightenment. So, you know, yes, we need medicine to cure us of our sickness, but we also, in a way, sort of need our sickness to cure our medicine. We can't stay in the bliss or the release of samadhi and wake up. We have to return to the unfolding in all of its craziness, but now we've grounded ourselves in the intrinsic. We've grounded ourselves in the motionless. So stage one of meditation practice is learning how to ground yourself in the immobile, in the motionless, in the imperturbable. But stage 2 is returning to the world of form, to one damn thing after another, but now grounded in that emptiness. And that is really the essence of koan practice. And koans are wonderful devices, but right now we actually have real life koans, right? So if you are able to enter the intrinsic and ground yourself deeply in the intrinsic, and you return to the unfolding, you will notice that the unfold, you will return to your emotional distress, actually, or your fear, your attachment, all of that comes back. And if you retreat from that, if you say, I thought I had overcome this by going into deep samadhi, you're not understanding fully Bodhidharma's message. We use the intrinsic, we use the immobile, samadhi, mushin, to return to the world of form, to the unfolding. And when we do that, we work through our karma. We work through our karma. The essence of most koans involves this process, learning how to ground yourself in emptiness, and then the koan gives you sort of like a subconscious or subliminal cue. If you have a staff, I will give you one. If you have no staff, I will take it away. Many people who work with that koan find on a sort of a subconscious or unconscious level, it triggers all kinds of feelings of loss and injustice and so on. They come flooding back on you. And it's possible to say, well, I thought I had left this behind when I could enter deep samadhi. But actually, you need to purify your mind now by working through your karma. So, you sit down on the cushion, you ground yourself in the immobile, and you say, give, take, if that happens to be your koan. And maybe all of these feelings of deprivation, or maybe one of your parents definitely loved a brother or sister clearly, more than you. And you've never gotten over that. That wound is something you carry through your life. It comes back now. But you keep returning to the immobile, to the intrinsic. And gradually what you notice is that you have to sit with your suffering, sit with your distress. But you notice it stops resonating so powerfully, and gradually it diminishes until it goes away. And when it goes away, it's like a clearing. It's like a clearing. It's yes, my mother loved my brother more than she loved me, and she showed it in a million different ways. That is just a fact. The unfolding is always just neutral. Trump is always just a neutral fact. He's produced by causes and conditions over which we have very little control. But our emotional distress in response to his actions is our karma at work. And so the proper way to respond to Trump or to COVID-19 or any other catastrophe is to ground ourselves in the unmoving and then work through our karmic responses. And we can't really know our karmic responses clearly until we ground ourselves in the unmoving and return to the unfolding. And when we return to the unfolding, we realize, oh, this is the secret of how I feel. This is what I didn't show to myself. I never realized I felt that way about my mother. I never allowed myself to see that my mother actually loved my brother more. But now I see it, and it's causing me a lot of pain, but I sit there and eventually that pain goes away and I just say, oh, this is what happened. So now I have purified myself, purified my mind and heart by returning from the intrinsic to the unfolding and really dissolving my karmic obstacles. And this process goes on and on. So I hope you've had a chance to stretch your legs a little bit, because I would like to do one more session of meditation, if that's okay. And there are many koans you can work with right now. And a koan is, as I said, it's a kind of subliminal cue. And it doesn't have to be too subtle to be effective, you know. What I'd like you to do is return to your cushion. Begin to watch your breath until you can get into contact to some degree with the intrinsic, the unmoving. And then you could say something like this. These are like one-word koans. You could say Trump. You could say trapped, right? Trapped. You could say caught. You could say virus. You could say danger. Please pick your koan. Zen teachers don't always let students pick their koans, but please pick your koan. And what I'd like you to do is we have time to maybe sit for another 10 minutes, and then we'll have to stop. But and we'll sort of assess at the other end of that period. But pick your koan, go into Samadhi if you can, get as deeply as you can, and then try saying Trump, or trying saying COVID, or try to say caught. We're all feeling very caught right now, yes? Okay, let's give it a try. So I'm afraid we have to stop our meditation, but and it's difficult to accomplish much in 25 minutes. But 25 minutes of meditation. But we've accomplished a lot all the same. This is what Bodhidharma meant. You know, this is the path of practice. It's the path of the principle, or the door of the principle, which means you sit down, you face the wall, and you confront or you encounter the Dharmakaya, your Buddha nature. The other way is the path of practice, using Donald Trump, using quarantine, using this disaster and that disaster to purify body, mind, and heart. Every time we go from the chaos into the moving, into the intrinsic, we release ourselves from the immediacy of the unfolding. And then when we ground ourselves deeply in that motionlessness, that mushin, that emptiness, and we return to the world of form, we're purifying body, heart, and mind. We're releasing ourselves from our karmic conditioning. We go through this process again and again, and we too will eventually be face to face with the Dharmakaya. So both of these paths lead in exactly the same place by a little different direction. But there's another aspect of this that I just want to mention in closing. You know, from the Mahayana perspective, there is no such thing as individual karma. You know, the Diamond Sutra says there's no such thing as an isolated individuality. So when I am cleaning up, quote unquote, my karma, I am not cleaning up my karma, but everybody's karma. You know, as I said a little earlier, you know, one way to think about our situation, the way Bodhidharma thought about our situation, is that this whole thing is a complex self-organizing system. And within that system, I'm arising and Trump is arising. And Anthony Fauci is arising. I'm so glad he's arising. The Dalai Lama is still here. And basically, when I'm cleaning up my karma, I'm cleaning up Trump's karma. I'm cleaning up everybody's karma. And in this way, we all help to create the Pure Land. We're all working for the liberation of everyone. And I think that alone makes practice an extraordinary gift. So I'm afraid we're out of time. And now I'd like to stop. And if we have a little time for questions, I'd be very happy to answer questions.
Well, sure. I'll hop on here just to say.
I have to turn my sound back on.
Hop on here just to say, for people who have to run out right now, we can keep going. But for them, thank you for joining us. And you can find a recording of this question and answer portion again at tricycle.org/live, where you can also find out about the future sessions, including tomorrow's session at 4 p.m. with Joseph Goldstein. So with that said, we can go through some of the questions. So one question, this was, no one in particular asked this question, but synthesizing a few of the comments that we got, some people objected to, you know, you're sharing from your personal political perspective.
Yes, sure.
But would you say it's true that if you, whoever it is that any individual person sees as the source of suffering or the person who they want to shift blame onto, that the practice would work the same if they're political beliefs were different from yours.
Yes, that's definitely so. You know, I mean, as I said, you know, Trump is actually neutral, right? You know, how we experience Trump is a product of our own karma. And so, yes, this is my own karma. I agree. It's something I need to keep cleaning up. I thought about being more discreet, but you know, I just thought it's something for other people to learn from and to sit with.
Let's see, anyone else? If you typed a question into chat earlier, it might have gotten lost under the comments. I'd ask that people please type it into the Q&A panel at the bottom. So one person asked, using video calling and seeing my own face during meditation made me think, is there any instruction for mirror meditation? I'll editorialize, I know in Zen, often you'll face a wall. Do you have any advice for people meditating facing a screen or even an image of themselves?
Well, you know, actually, if you focus your attention on any object, it could be the breath, it could be a candle in front of you. Eventually, your mind will become blank. Right? So this is actually an interesting quality of consciousness itself, or you could even say an interesting quality of reality. But you know, any object attended to with one-pointed mind for a period of time will eventually lead you to that imperturbable empty place. So it could be staring at a screen and seeing your own face. It could be also listening to sounds, like the sounds of birds. You know, if you listen to a sound long enough, you enter that motionless, imperturbable place and your mind becomes blank. So I haven't tried the screen meditation, but it sounds like it would work.
Thank you. This is just a clarification question. Jane asks, the term you used, Wu Jin, when you use it, what does it mean?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. You know, when you begin to focus on your breath, it's probably the case that your mind is occupied by thoughts, and you go from thought to thought, memories, you begin to free associate. If you keep focusing on the breath, eventually the thoughts become peripheral. At first they're at the center of your attention, and then the thoughts don't completely go away, but they begin to be on the margins of your attention, and the breath is more at the center of your attention. And this process can take a long time. You know, this could take, you know, it could take 6 weeks or something before you begin to be able to get to this place. But if you meditate regularly, but eventually the thoughts are sort of like clouds in the sky going by, and the breath is at the center of your attention. Now that's one-pointed attention on the breath, right? One-pointed attention on the breath. And if you stay with that, eventually you'll notice that sooner or later your mind will become blank, or there'll be intervals where your mind will become blank. And so you'll be following the breath, and at some point, it can be a very powerful experience. You'll just suddenly realize your breath has disappeared. In fact, everything has disappeared for some interval, and then things return. But at first, that experience of mu xin, or empty mind, can be just like that, just like a little moment of emptiness. But if you keep practicing, you realize that that emptiness is actually quite vast. And the more you return to it, the vaster it becomes. One way to think about mu xin is that it's really the doorway into what we in Zen call your big mind. So, you know, we have we say in Zen, the small mind. This is the discriminating mind, the self-centered mind. But when you follow the breath out and you practice that, eventually you achieve one-pointed attention. And then if you keep focusing on the breath, just as I said a little earlier, if you focus on a flame or you focus on your image on the screen, sooner or later you just enter this, you experience, I should say, this emptiness that is always there, but passes by unnoticed because we're only looking at the we could say the world of form, or we're only looking at the unfolding. So that is what I mean by Mushin, and it will happen to everybody who practices in this way.
So one person asks, Robert asks, why will cleaning up our karma lead to helping ourselves and others in a positive way? Why not clean up, feel equanimity, let the world go to hell? I don't believe this, but why not?
Well, I'm so glad. So I think that actually compassion or loving kindness is our default state according to my understanding of Buddhism. So, what keeps us from being compassionate, loving, and responsive people is our karma. So, the more you clean up karma, the more you begin to experience this naturally awakened state, which is generous and boundlessly generous and compassionate. So I think it's unlikely to happen that as you clean up karma, you'll be motivated to protect yourself. That motivation to protect yourself is a product of an illusion, right? Of the sense of separation that doesn't really exist. That karma creates that sense of separation, but every step as you're dissolving karma begins to increase your awareness of interconnectedness or interdependence. And, you could say that our naturally enlightened, the emotional character of our naturally enlightened state is compassion. So as I say, it's unlikely to happen. If you just clean up karma, you will find this extraordinary generosity, basically, that you might not have imagined you actually had access to.
We have a comment from Facebook from Laura. You say 10 minutes, 25 minutes in total isn't long to meditate on this, but I've struggled today with 6 minutes. It was still beneficial, but my point is perhaps being in a crisis time makes it harder to settle the mind. What do you think about that?
Well, I think many of the sutras say that bodhisattvas have what they call long enduring minds. And what that means is that it's really necessary to cultivate deep samadhi. So 6 minutes is where the Buddha himself at one time could only meditate for 6 minutes. But you go back to the cushion day after day. And tomorrow it will be 7 minutes, 8 minutes, eventually half an hour goes like that. Eventually an hour goes like that. So I would just say, please make it a project. And, the world is on fire, right? That's always been the case, right? From the time of the historical Buddha, So, there's no time to practice when the world isn't on fire. We might not be paying attention, but it's always on fire. So there, in a way, there's no better time to do this. And, if you do cultivate this awareness, the awareness of the intrinsic, if you can get to this motionless place, you'll be able to cope with all of this chaos so much more effectively. And that spirit of compassion or generosity will arise more and more. So it's a really good use of your time to try to get to the cushion every day. And just remember, if your legs hurt, the Buddha's legs hurt. If 8 minutes is all you can do, there was a time when 8 minutes was all the Buddha could do. So just remind yourself that, and please, persist.
So I think we have time maybe for 1 or 2 more questions. We have a lot of questions on here, so I apologize to the.
It's my pleasure.
Perhaps get overlooked. Can you share tools for bringing the second practice into mindfulness practice once we get up from the seated practice? understand that if we practice over time sitting, this naturally occurs more. Are there other tools you use, or do you suggest simply the seated practice? Sorry, are there other tools you use, or do you suggest simply the seated practice to bring this in over time?
Yeah, I mean, since I have trained in the Zen tradition, seated meditation is, sort of the center of my personal practice. I mean, in, say, Pure Land Buddhism, people they can find the immobile by reciting the Buddha's name or lines from the Lotus Sutra. If you just keep reciting those, you'll find the intrinsic. So there are many different ways to do it. I definitely think that seated meditation is a very expedient method that works quite well. And what you'll find is if you do make seated meditation your practice, you'll notice that off the cushion too, you begin to enter that thoughtless state of samadhi. You'll be walking around on the street and you'll look at somebody's face and you'll feel like, oh my, that's my face, and you might notice suddenly that you aren't really lost in thought. You're just unified with the objects of your attention. And that will happen naturally if you practice.
So perhaps one last question. Peter asks, when so much fear and despair is being generated every day, how can the purification keep up with the addition of negative feelings?
Could I have the last part of that again?
Sure. How can the purification keep up with the addition of negative feelings, the constant addition of negative feelings?
Well, this is what the medicine needs the sickness, right? I mean, actually, everything is helping you wake up. If you try to maintain that spirit, somebody I admire really deeply was a Jiu Kennet. She is the founder of Shasta Zen Center, Shasta Abbey. And when she was I believe this is correct, she was the first woman to be ordained as an Anglican priest in England. And she fought everybody to be ordained. And then, she became an Anglican priest and she wasn't entirely happy with her life. And she got very interested in Zen and she decided she wanted to practice Zen. So she went to a temple in Japan and, I love Japanese culture. I have many Japanese friends, but you're probably going to get more calls or more emails about this, but Japanese culture, like our culture, can be very sexist, and the atmosphere in the temple was extremely sexist. Here was a woman in a monastery that very liberal Roshi or abbot had allowed her to train there, and everybody tripped her up. Somebody would say, "I'll wake you up, don't worry, I'll wake you up at 4:30. And then he wouldn't wake her up, and she'd come in late to sutra recitation, and everybody would think, "Oh, brother, this is what happens when we let women into the community, or when we let Europeans into the community." And people would, somebody would say, "Rake the ground this way," and it would be the wrong way. And then the temple's manager would come by and say, "What the hell are you doing?" And she was in despair, and she went in to see the Roshi, and the Roshi said, look. Everything is helping you to wake up. These people, whatever they intend, they're helping you to wake up. And she said that brought her to awakening. So just say to yourself every time, this is helping me to wake up. It will only help you wake up, though, if you practice. So please, no matter how formidable the obstacles, and remember, our Dharma ancestors have had it much worse than we have right now. Unbelievable persistence was required. So just say, everything is helping me wake up. And actually, from the Buddhist standpoint, that's absolutely true. Everything, let me just return to the koan. All the earth is your medicine. All the earth is your medicine.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Peter, for your question. And thank you for everyone for joining us on this call today. Once again, our next session is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Our editor-in-chief, James Shaheen, will be moderating a Q&A with Insight Meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein. You can check tricycle.org to get, tricycle.org/live to see a recording of this and our previous talks, as well as to see our schedule for upcoming sessions. We are providing these sessions for free, so if you want to help support this program and our other efforts, please consider donating. Again, you can do that at tricycle.org/live. Everyone have a great day, and once again, thank you so much, Kurt, for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.